Orange man look. There's only one true orange man, we all know. So, and,
and
and I'm not it.
and we are live and back and better than ever. Apologies about the slight delay. Gil is on his way momentarily. We were having some technical issues, but happy Friday to everyone. TGIF and welcome. As always, it is time to get your true crime fill on Fridays with Phil and Gil. We bring you the best guests in all of true crime, and these two are so good. They're here every week. You already know America's most respected detective. You're looking at him. He spent decades in law enforcement, becoming an expert at obtaining criminal confessions. He spent 23 years as a homicide detective in the Houston PD. He investigated more than 400 homicides. So you cyber sleuths who think you know more than Phil, you don't. He's also a Marine, and he's the owner of Kindred Spirits Investigations and was the star of the show, of which he does not like the title, The Interrogator. We should call it The Interviewer. Phil, I got to start with something a little difficult to talk about.
Sure.
There's this person, Tyre Nichols, 29 years old, pulled over by the Memphis PD on January 7th. They allegedly beat him so badly he died of his injuries 3 days later. I wasn't really planning to talk about this, to be honest. They're about to release the video of this at 7 p.m. Eastern time. And now the head of the FBI has spoken out, the head of the Department of Justice. They are expecting demonstrations, whether they're violent or not, we don't know. It was an African-American man, 6'3", 150 pounds. He had Crohn's disease. He had a gastrointestinal illness. He was basically pounded on by 5 African-American police officers in the city of Memphis. They say the beating is more brutal than what we saw with Rodney King in the early 90s. You spent much of your life in law enforcement. When you hear about this, what runs through your mind?
Well, I don't make a judgment just hearing what's reported on the news. I know that these 5 officers have been charged with, I believe, second-degree murder and some other accompanying charges. 4 of them have been released on bond. And I tell everyone when something like this happens to wait for the investigation. Now, I'm not, so I don't know. I'm not going to make a comment about, I just know what the results are of the reported incident. I never make a comment until I've seen and give any opinion until I've seen the facts, see what happened. I have never been in favor of this releasing videos until the investigation is complete. And when I say complete, I'm talking about if it does result in charges until the time that the trial is conducted and it is presented as evidence at that trial. Because in my experience, and I've worked a lot of use of force, officer involved, use of force incidents, use of force, deadly force, officer involved shootings, death in custodies. And again, I entered every one of those objectively. It didn't make any difference what side of the coin the parties were on. It was my responsibility to look at it objectively, let evidence lead me where I need to be. So in this particular case, I'm going to stick with that. And because this releasing these videos, it never comes to a positive result, ever. And it doesn't make any difference because you've got to remember these videos are snapshots of a particular view in a particular period of time. So what we're seeing in the one-dimensional view of that camera is not what's happening around it. And it's got no emotion. It's not making any decisions. It's not in the moment. It's only viewing a specific part of that moment. So when I've taught use of force classes, when I've taught officer involved shooting classes, I do have some videos from dash cams on patrol cars from 2 different angles or 3 different angles of shootings. And if you look at one, it would appear that, oh my gosh, how could these officers do this? How could they do this? Then when you look at the other 2, you understand why they took the action that they took. So these types of use of force incidents don't happen in a vacuum. These 5 officers, and trust me, I'm not defending or crucifying these guys. I'm just saying, to being objective, these 5 officers didn't go out that day and decided they were going to beat somebody to death. That just doesn't happen. Now, not to say that it doesn't happen, but we have to look at the incident, and as those detectives that are doing those investigations look at it from the beginning to the end, and what caused it, and then what was the effect. And so I'm just telling you that, hey, Jonathan.
Hey.
I'm just, until I see the facts come out, I'm going to reserve any observations about what those officers may or may not be guilty of. Now, again, back to the videos. In my experience, when those videos have been released to family members specifically, they've never convinced the family. I've never seen one where the family was convinced that their loved one did something wrong. The officers should not have done what they did. And I'm sorry, but that's just real life. And so when these things get put out into the public, it's with the same reception, and they're never received in a way that shows that the officers did what they had to do at that moment in time. So we use in law enforcement, we use the force continuum, and that starts from verbal commands or mere presence all the way to deadly force. And you go through that continuum about the escalation of force. And it's not a fair fight. Police officers are not supposed to fight to a push, to a fight to an equal. They are authorized to use the amount of force necessary to achieve a legitimate law enforcement purpose. And that means they have to use the amount of force that is above the force being used against them to bring about that conclusion, get that person in custody. And unless you have been there, and unless you have fought with a suspect who does not want to be taken into custody, and I don't care how big or small they are, if you've not been there and been in the belly of the beast on one of those situations, in my opinion, you have no business making any comments at all based on what you saw on a period of time in a video that was one-dimensional in its scope. So,
and the Nichols family, very well put, Phil, as always. The Nichols family already is saying, please do not get violent. You can demonstrate, but they are expecting this to potentially turn violent. I can tell you, Phil and Gil, in news, having worked in it for over 25 years, if you pitch a story, what's the first question your producers ask you? Do you have video to accompany it?
oh, sure.
And now this video will be presented to the nation at 7 p.m. And Phil makes a great point. Videos give a snippet. They give a slice of what you're looking at, not a 360-degree context. DBs already, and I really didn't plan to talk about this, but this is going to explode into a massive story over the weekend. And the reason I know that is every mainstream media channel is already hyping up everyone.
Sure.
And that's the business the media's in. But it says here, DB Not saying the 5 cops are guilty, but I think they could have found a way to subdue a single 150-pound man. He's a 150-pound, 6'3" gentleman. Now, comes up and says the selective release of videos is meant to rile people up, and they don't care about the consequences. Ben Crump, who's the attorney for the family, is a race baiting, ambulance chasing charlatan looking for fame and a payday. Jonathan Gilliam, we weren't going to talk about this, but it's going to, as I said, blow up into a huge story over this weekend, and you're likely to see rioting on TV. This person was pulled over January 7th, an African-American, Tyre Nichols. 5 African-American police officers beat on him, not once, but they catch him a second time. He got away, beat on him twice. According to all the reports out there, it is more brutal than what we saw with Rodney King. Your thoughts on this?
Well, first of all, everybody always looks past what the reason for this to occur. It's not like the cops just walked down the street and grabbed somebody and started beating on them, right? That didn't occur. And then the fact that they had to catch him a second time shows you that he never complied. I used to, I know this lady, I cannot remember where this was when I was in the FBI, and she was in New York, just somebody that in New York. And, it was the first time I ever heard it, but I always thought it, but she just said it just right. You're not going to have a problem if you comply. I don't remember the exact words that she said, but if you want to live, comply. For everybody that's scared of the police, if you feel like you're in a situation that you shouldn't be in, you need to comply. It's really that simple. You're not going to get into these situations. Remember, he got himself into this situation. And that's what people need to remember. This isn't, they always try to turn this. I'm so glad, and I'll just say it, I'm so glad that these 5 cops are not white, because then they would have a reason to turn it into a racial thing, right? And this just goes to show you, it doesn't matter if the cop is white or black most of the time, because what occurs is someone doesn't comply. And when they don't comply, things ratchet up. And it only takes one other cop. It doesn't matter if there's 5 cops there. It takes one other cop to think that there is something there that is raising the bar for what force needs to be used to subdue this person. And if that one other police officer feels that way, the other officers are going to follow that lead of that guy if they believe it's reasonable enough to raise, as Phil was talking about, on that continuum. He feels like he needs to raise that, and he goes hands-on. Well, the other cops aren't going to stop there and watch a boxing match. They're going to get involved, and they're going to stop this. So that's the problem that cameras have, is that they don't show, and typically the news doesn't show what led up to that, and it doesn't show that and emphasize the fact that this individual never complied. And so we can say all we want about the beatings. We can say all we want and go back and forth. Was it justified or was it not justified? The fact is, it always comes down to the fact that the person didn't comply. There's not one justified or unjustified fight with a police officer that did not start with someone not complying. That's it. You could take the goofiest, worst cop. You could take the best cop who got in a tussle, a bad situation. They all come back to that one point where they gave an order and the person didn't comply. It's that simple. And so I think when we see these things, it's preventable. Every single one of these cases right now, I don't know what happened with these 5 guys. I don't know what led to this. I don't know how this fight on something may look more brutal on a video than it actually is. I mean, it must have been brutal because the guy is dead, but we don't know the whole gist of that story either. However, the way these things are handled afterwards reminds me of the way our government handles the Ukraine issue. Like, they never get ahead of it. They never say, it's going to be bad. We're going to release this video. We got intel on Antifa, on BLM. Let's get on top of this. Let's have the National Guard out there. They don't. They just let it unfold. And these politicians have no idea how to tactically tamp a situation down. They feel as though let's just let it run rampant. And they always do it on a Friday because it's good news and they can watch the whole thing unfold all weekend. Lots of advertising, lots of things going on. The media is going to amp it up so it turns into a big
give the
event.
rioters the chance to go all weekend with this stuff.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens. So why release it on Friday? Why not release it on Monday? When I'm telling you, they say they probably say they don't want to shut the city down or whatever. I can guarantee you that it would be different on a Monday. Many of those people would not be able to travel. You know, they wouldn't be able to. The city would not stand for it because the city is going to shut down. So they do it on a Friday, and it turns out to be a weekend of rioting, looting. People lose their businesses, their homes. Cities, get tormented. And by the end of it, in 2 months, you're not going to know. There's nothing going to change. And that's the other key to this is that Rodney King, all the other incidents that we've had along the way.
What has changed, Jonathan? The Rodney King incident is not even that's apples and oranges.
But
and we could have a discussion about Rodney King. I will tell you all these incidents that we've seen on video. Over the years, Rodney King, Eric Garner, and the stuff that wasn't on video, Freddie Gray in Baltimore, Michael Brown,
George Floyd,
Martin, which was not a police officer, but you can go through all these uses.
George Floyd, the biggest one, probably.
What's that?
George Floyd. And we don't even want to get off on George Floyd, but I'm just telling you that those examples are. There's a reason why in the Rodney King incident, if we want to use that, if they're wanting to use that, those officers were acquitted in state court. I think there was one that was found guilty on a misdemeanor assault thing, and it was the officer that had pushed King's head down or something like that. And then where did they get him? They got him in federal court. That's the catch-22 here for these types of cases. And we can argue all day long about, they shouldn't have done this, that. But what Gil has just talked about, what Jonathan's just talked about here, and what I just said, there is a cause and effect. You've got to start at the beginning of where this thing starts and why does it happen. They do not happen in a vacuum. None of them do. Now, there was a shooting in South Carolina, I believe it was South Carolina, an officer that shot a guy in the back who had gotten his taser and that kind of thing. And they prosecuted him, and I think he's doing prison time.
Yeah, that was murder.
That was justifiable. I'm willing to. I'll look at any of these things objectively, and if the cop is wrong, I'll be the first one to stand up and say the cop was wrong. But when we have a bunch of people, with all due respect to Mr. Crump, he's become the face of these incidents.
He's the Gloria Allred.
Now he's got to couch it into, because there are 5 black officers involved. Now he's got to couch it in not in racist terms, but he's got to couch it in it's all the police.
But even
the one a problem. And this is
the one you're talking. Even when you're talking about South Carolina, even that one started because a guy didn't comply.
Correct.
And then it went forward. And this guy Crump has now become the Gloria Allred of these types of cases, and turns them into something, that is not. It always goes into like civil rights and we're oppressed, and it never goes back to the fact that these people get into altercations where they do not comply with law enforcement. And that really is where this starts. It doesn't start with the beatings. It starts with the lack of complying. And
hey, look, I'll give you a real world example. When I was in patrol, in the area that I worked in was a great place to hunt for stolen cars. And we would get them. In fact, I had one guy that was a beat partner. This guy was a hound. He could find these stolen cars. And 9 times out of 10, we would get in a chase. They would wreck out, crash out, and then we would have to get to them to get them in custody to make sure that they didn't have a weapon in the car that they were going to use, so forth and so on. And I remember a 16-year-old in a stolen car. We get in the chase. And after about the third turn, I'm in his tailpipe. And he tries to make a real radical turn, and he ends up T-boning a telephone pole in a ditch. He's not injured. They never are. And we swooped down upon him. And when we got on him, what's our first priority? Is to get him in control and in custody. And that's what we did. We pulled him out of there. Well, what did he want to do? He wanted to fight with us. So we had to up the level of force to get him into custody, and we did that. After the discussion was after we got him in custody, and I put him in, and the one thing I remember distinctly about it was he had on leopard underwear. But I put him in the back of the patrol car, and I asked him, I said, why in the world are you fighting with us? And he just looked at me and goes, well, because I know you guys are going to beat my ass. And I said, well, don't you think that if you had stopped and let me walk up to you and take you into custody, that you wouldn't have taken that ass whooping? And he looked at me and a friggin' light bulb went off. And he goes, I guess you're right, officer. So, 1 + 1 still equals 2. If you do what the nice police officer is asking you to do, you're not going to end up getting that ass whooping. So what Jonathan is saying is right on the money, and people don't want to hear that, but that's the reality. There are not. Look, I was in law enforcement for 33 years, and I can tell you that I have seen a lot of butt get kicked. I've kicked a little myself. I have been assaulted myself. I have been shot at. I've been involved in shootings. I'm just telling you, this stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum. There's a beginning and an end to it. Mm-hmm. And I'm not the one, and I never saw in 33 years, not to say it didn't happen, but I never saw any, and I worked for 3 different police agencies. And I never saw an incident, excuse me, where an officer picked out somebody because of the color of their skin and went and whipped their butt and put them in jail or in the hospital. Never saw it. Not to say it doesn't happen in certain places, but I never witnessed that. And I had one incident where an officer did something in front of me that was not right, and I pulled him to the side later, he and I told him, look, I'm going to take you out and give you a lesson if you ever do something like that again, because you compromised everyone in that setting because of the action you took. So
let me jump in with one quick comment here. So RC writes, Georgia is already declaring a state of emergency over fears of civil unrest, and then wrote this comment, which is directed to Gil. Hate to say, I just lost some respect for you over your opinion of compliance. Cops should learn how to control themselves. 5 bystanders could have jumped in too. It'd be a different story. This is a very difficult subject. Obviously, both sides get very emotional. But I guess to Gil, since it's directed at you, I think that there is a legitimate fear, especially among African Americans, about complying with police because of exactly what Phil just said, that they feel like if they stop and they comply, that they will get that ass whooping. But it's kind of a catch-22 because then this stuff keeps happening. Is there any solution?
Well, it crosses racial boundaries. The race of the person is irrelevant.
Yeah, listen, you have to realize the majority of police work does not have to do with the race of the person. It has to do with the neighborhood that they live in and the regular violence that happens in that neighborhood. People want to say, well, this is a racial thing. They don't jump on people in Beverly Hills, but they pound them down in Compton. Well, in Beverly Hills, the cops aren't getting shot and killed, and they're not getting accosted on a daily basis. So the tactics change where you're at. And one thing I want to say to all the people that listen to this show, you have to stop listening. When you listen to Phil and I or any of these other people that come up here and talk, you have to realize that we're speaking from a position of experience where we've been in these positions. I've been in fights in law enforcement before, but the fact is that the person was not complying and we had to subdue that person for a reason, because they presented a threat to myself, my partners, or to the public. And there was a reason why we amped it up. We didn't just go out there and walk around looking, oh, this guy, he just made a wrong turn with no signal, and now we're going to put a beating on him. That's not the way these things occur. It ramps up. And so I would just warn people on losing respect for other people, because you don't know the totality of the circumstances that we speak from. And when you look at this stuff, you have to realize, if you were on the street and you followed it from point A to point B, or death, wherever these things occur, you would see a whole different story than what you see when it's presented in the news. And that is a big problem we have with everything. Idaho killing, the Murdaugh killing, police shootings and beatings, politics in Ukraine and selling tanks. I mean, you can look at all of it. And I used to think, when I was in law enforcement, and then I made the quick jump over into media, I wasn't really prepared for what I saw behind the scenes, even especially as a CNN contributor. What I saw behind the scenes was that, and Joel, you know this, there's a lot of wrangling for a good story. They are looking for a story that people are going to latch onto. And when they get that story, the way it's reported, what is reported can be affected greatly by what is being consumed by people. That's why online sleuths, I've never seen anything like it, but during the Idaho killing, you saw, they may have had people like Phil and I on television, but you go and look online where majority of people get the reporting, and there were stories that were just people saying, I think I saw this, or I have an idea that this is what it is. And then that's reported as truth. So when you look at all of these things, you have to take a step back and realize that what you think is historical is actually flawed history. There's whole other stories back there with the majority of these things. And like Phil was talking about, the guy in South Carolina, the cop murdered that guy, shot him in the back, pure murder. However, you go backwards into the video, it was a legitimate stop, and the guy got no tussle because he hadn't paid child support, and he took off running. And that's where it started. It started
and he
right
got
there.
a hold of the officer's taser, and the officer made some bad decisions.
That's correct. And it just escalated. And it wasn't just a cop that showed up to kill somebody. It was an escalation that got to a point where the cop felt threatened for whatever reason and shot him in the back. So with all these cases, even George Floyd, all the way back, it comes down to a point of not complying. We are citizens. We have skin in the game. Cops are citizens. They take a badge and they say, I'm going to police the nation for the laws to keep it safe and to keep order in the place where we live. It doesn't just take a cop to keep order. It takes a citizenry that says, we are also going to put skin in the game and do what we have to do when we interact with these people. Let me say this one thing. I think cops are not trained the way they should be these days. I think we have gotten away from the community policing, but I think also that the community now treats cops terribly. And if we were to back up and we were to show people that they have skin in the game, and to take cops and say, let's throttle it back a little bit, and when we got to put hands on people, we're going to go full bore to subdue them. There's been a breakdown on both sides. So all this stuff that people think is just cops going around beating people, it has to do with the neighborhood that they work in. It has to do with what happens on a regular basis.
Let me interject something here.
Sure.
Look, I know of cops that were stopped by the police. They were drunk, whatever they were, and force had to be used on them to get them arrested. So it doesn't make any difference what flavor you are. Yep. If you're not going to comply with a police officer's orders, then you're going to suffer the consequences of that, depending on how far you decide to escalate things. So it's not a group of people, it's everyone. And I would just disagree with you slightly, Jonathan, on the training issue. Mm-hmm. I was an instructor, law enforcement instructor for 30 years, and I still instruct. I taught street survival, use of force, homicide investigations, interview, and a cadre of other different topics. I would tell you that my argument would be that we have the best trained law enforcement community, 750 to 800,000 police officers, local, state, federal levels. We have the best trained law enforcement in the country in any point in time. It is not a matter of training. It's a matter of people not understanding what police officers do. And I've said it before, I've had many jobs in my life. I first started scooping ice cream at Baskin and Robbins when I was 14 years old, making $1 an hour.
Tactically?
Well, you know, always.
I love
right?
31 flavors, man.
I had
wish
to
they
use
would
it. There's
sponsor us.
32. There's 32 flavors, but I think it was. But anyway, and then I went on. I worked construction. I sacked groceries. I was in the Marines, platoon commander. Look, and then I was a cop. I've never had a job where more people knew how to do my job better than me, having never done it.
We are going to get into Idaho and Murdaugh. I promise we'll make some time for that. Just
can I say one other thing, Joel? Just one,
right
very
in.
short.
Yeah.
When it comes to, I don't disagree with you. I think when you heard that, you think I'm saying something that I'm not. I think our training is great, but I think it could always be better. And I think the reality is that we're in a position right now where the training is here. Training can always improve. But because of politics, we have police officers that they don't want to quite do this stuff because it might get them in trouble, might cause some problems. I look at what happened in Uvalde, for instance, the reaction that the police had when they showed up there. Most of those people had first responder or active shooter training, but they didn't engage. And so what happens when you get enough of these officers there, I look at the way we do police chases, and there's a system to that, but maybe that system needs to be looked at and improved. But I think overall what we're seeing is that throughout this political upheaval that we've had over the past 10 years, and really back since Clinton when we were doing affirmative action, is that you've continued to get people who were experienced to retire quicker, and people who probably should have been hired in the first place to get promoted. And so along the way, the politics have kind of, it's almost like peanut butter over bread. If you put too much peanut butter on there, you just taste the peanut butter. And that's the politics. The politics is on top of the training. It's on top of the attention that you have every day. And so you got cops that either won't act, or when they act, their brain is not used to being in a tactical manner. So when they go full bore, there's a disconnect that happens where they're just not in that mindset well enough on a daily basis where they can think their way through the situation. And I know that, places like where you were at in Houston, I was with the FBI, and I was also at a small town in Arkansas, and I've been all over this country, as you have, Phil, seeing these different police departments. Some of them are not trained that well. They don't get the training that other people do. And then in big cities, sometimes, like New York, all the training exists, but they don't do it enough. And so I think we have this perfect storm right now of capable training, capable cops, politics, and citizens who don't want to have skin in the game. And when you mix all that together,
one of the points I think you're making, tell me if I'm wrong, but
yeah.
I would agree with you in terms of the quality of the training, because when I first started back, 35 years ago now, and I started getting into training, it was all about cops going home alive.
Right.
It was about tactical training. It was about those felony traffic stops. And we trained and we trained and we trained. I taught those guys. And I was working for a sheriff's department at that time here. And over the years, even the tactical training changed, but it was a good type of change, because as tactics become, it's through trial and error that a lot of these tactics have come about now that cops are using. And I have seen over the years where I say we, the administrators, not the real cops, but the cops that are running these departments that have decided to have a career to be paper cops, they're so worried about which way the cultural winds are blowing.
Yep.
That we start picking out specific groups of people because they're yelling the loudest. And we think we're going to address each one of those groups by some sort of forced mandatory training to tell people tell officers how to treat these specific groups. That is such freaking nonsense. It just irritates the crap out of me.
It used to be based on the crime.
They're
and the
taught.
actions.
That's exactly right. They're taught to treat people the same. It doesn't make any difference what flavor you are. You treat someone as fair as they will let you treat them. And the way I operated, and I think the way most cops operate, is I'm going to treat you with dignity and respect until that moment occurs where you've decided that you're not going to return that. And you're going to not comply, or you're going to fight me. And I'm going to do what I need to do to protect myself and here's the other thing, to protect them.
Mm-hmm.
When these officers get in police chases, they have a responsibility to themselves, to the citizens at large, and to the person that they're chasing to try to bring this to a safe conclusion. So there's a whole lot of moving parts in these use of force incidents. There's a whole lot of moving part. There's a lot of distractions now in law enforcement that were not there when I was there, when Jonathan was there, and it serves to get officers in trouble for the wrong reasons, and to get some of them injured and some of them killed. Because what Jonathan just said, it will cause them to hesitate about making a decision that they need to make right then.
And then when they do make that decision, it's worse.
I'm going to get sued. I'm going to get charged, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So,
I just want to hop in a couple quick questions. I want to get Phil's take on one more thing, and then we'll slide over to Idaho. But Gorgeous Junk, love the name. With all the many warnings about the severity of the video, I'm almost scared to watch it. And that just goes to the point of what is being ginned up in the media right now. Roy Johnson, I was surprised that the officers were involved were African-American, which goes to show you that there is, whether a reality or a perception, there is a major issue in this country when it comes to race and police.
Hey, Memphis has a predominantly black police force. I know a whole platoon of teams that were on Bill Street, and they got in a big fight, and all of a sudden the gang unit rolled in. It was all black guys with hoodies on. They didn't know who they were, so they started fighting them back. And let me tell you something. These team guys got a whooping. I mean, the cops got the fight of their life, but some of these the SEALs, this was years ago. They didn't know who they were because they showed up in black hoodies and stuff, and it was a fight. You know, it really, the circumstances, situations that happen. But Memphis police, they exist in a very dangerous environment daily. This guy who did this stuff, who didn't comply, and he ended up getting beat to death allegedly. That guy may never exist in that community. He may be a good guy, but that day he chose to act in that way. These cops exist in that environment every single day. So black, white, it doesn't matter. These cops in Memphis, there's a lot of black cops, and they're going to act the same way a white cop acts because they're being trained to act and to take action in an environment that is aggressive towards them.
Correct.
And I want to ask everybody this: if the cops had heard the screams, and saw it through a window the alleged killer Brian Kohlberger murdering these women in Idaho, and then he comes out and gets in their car, and they get in a chase, and then he doesn't comply, what would they want him to do? If he got out of the car and started running, and he had a knife, or he tried to hit cops with a car, and they finally get him out, do they want him to come? Do they what would people want? This guy just murdered 4 people, right? The point I'm trying to make is it wouldn't matter if he's black or if he's white. The fact is, if those cops that put hands on that guy, if he didn't comply, he is going to get taken down because of the severity of what he did and because he's fleeing and not complying. Eventually, they would have to put hands on him, and he may get the beating of a lifetime.
Well, that's why,
continues.
you know, and that's why this charging these cops
automatically makes it bad.
I don't even know that the investigation is over with yet.
Right.
And I mean, so the point I'm trying to make here, and we had an incident here in Houston where 2 people were killed. They were white. It was on a drug raid. The officer that's now charged with murder was black. So it has nothing to do with race. It has something to do with an individual who made the wrong decision. And
how big were those riots?
How big were those riots? Case, it was the officer who lied on a search warrant to get into this house, and these people had nothing to do with anything.
Yeah.
And they went in there, and the tragedy was that it ended up being 2 property owners defending their property, and both of them got killed as a result. So mistakes are made. Oof. I'm just telling you that, you know, mistakes are made, and when they are made, the police are held accountable. Now, it was a while before this officer, and there was a couple other officers that were charged with anything because they had an investigation. This business about charging somebody just because of a video is ridiculous.
You're already convicting them.
Because of a specific incident right off the bat, and you don't even know that the officials don't even know what happened. They need to have the investigation. And I said it before, this releasing of videos before the investigation's even concluded or before it goes to trial, if it goes to trial, I think is a disservice to the community at large.
You're already convicting them.
Yeah,
You're already convicting these guys.
Couple more comments here. Corinna, who watches us from Vienna, Austria, says race and social background are surely factors, but the hugest problem is a level of acceptable violence in American history, in American society. And then we go to this one, Eve Salvagni. Now it's the media's fault for telling and showing us to see and hear with our own eyes, own ears and eyes, the reality. And I was a member of the media, and I'm all for transparency, but trust me,
that's not the reality, though.
The media has ulterior motives. And then we go to this. Ann Hawkins, thanks for having this discussion. There are many factors here. 1, no compliance. 2, training of law enforcement. 3, use of body cameras when turned on. 4, release of info to the public. Friday for weekend violence. Keep talking. We can talk all day long. But Phil, let me ask you this: in these cases of excessive force that you've worked on, investigated, is there an issue where adrenaline? It's kind of like a group think and adrenaline combined, and now things just spiral out of control? Because look, most police officers, you kind of have to be an alpha male to be a police officer. Get into these fights, be tough enough to handle the job description. Can adrenaline kind of get away from you?
Well, I would tell you, and I'm only going to speak from my experience. The short answer to that question is yes, it can happen. And of all the police shootings that I worked, there was one where that is exactly what happened. And the horrible result was an officer that, in my judgment, should have never been a police officer. It's unfortunate, but those people slipped through. Panicked, did not revert to his training because he was not trainable in the sense that he retained those qualities of his training to allow him to make better decisions. And the end result was that he shot a 15-year-old in the back of the head and killed him while he was on the ground, complying. And it was a tragedy. In fact, we have a policy now at HPD as a result of that particular incident. And of course, that officer, no longer a police officer, and I want to say he was charged with manslaughter or something along those lines. But the point I'm trying to make here is yes, it does happen. But I want to say something about, the FBI getting involved in these civil rights. They've already announced that, the director of the FBI and the DOJ, they've already announced they're going to do a civil rights investigation on these officers, blah, blah. Are you kidding me? I mean, really? We're going to make that judgment? They did the same thing with Michael Brown, Freddie Gray, all these other ones. And you know what happened? Not one federal charge resulted in any of those incidents.
Mm-hmm.
So when the FBI gets involved, and it's from the aspect, and Gil, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the aspect of civil rights. Is there a civil rights violation? Is there a federal nexus here to why the FBI needs to be involved in this investigation? And I can tell you that of all of those cases, that there are thousands of these things that are sent to the FBI every freaking year.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? At the end of it, only about 2 to 8% of those ever realize any kind of charges. Now those numbers are incredibly low when you consider the thousands of those incidents that are reported
Mm-hmm.
and what they end up being determined as being righteous.
So the
Civil
thing
rights
you were
violation.
talking about, the one you were talking about in Houston, right? I don't know if the FBI came down there and looked at that, but I'm hearing you tell this story, and I'm like, man, that is a civil rights violation when he lied on a search warrant and then went in and killed these 2 homeowners. That's something that I could see the FBI coming down if they wanted to catch charges on this guy. But what good does that do? If they want to go down and study it and then put this out, that's one thing. But here's the reality of what happens. They pick and choose the Civil Rights Department in D.C., at the Department of Justice, and at the D.C. field office where these people kind of spring out of. They, in every field office that's big enough, has civil rights agents that kind of, that's what they look towards, like you have organized crime or whatever, and they'll put 1 or 2 people in there. New York, it's bigger. But when they do this, what you're seeing right now is basically a government grandstand. They will come in. These cops are going to have the video shown, which is going to basically, they're only going to show the portion where the officer's cameras start, and it means the incident's already started, and they're going to show the beating and the result of that. It's going to be horrible. You're going to see it. It's going to look terrible. So they're already being played on the court of public opinion by just showing that. Next thing you know, the FBI says, we're going to send our civil rights division. People now automatically assume that these guys violated civil rights. And then when they come down there, when you add in an attorney like this guy, what you're going to see is that they are actually they're actually going through a trial in front of the cameras, not in front of a judge. They are presenting evidence. They are presenting witnesses. They're presenting all these things, and we're not even in a trial. They're just putting it in the media. So how are we supposed to have peaceful resolutions and learn lessons from this when this stuff is presented like this? Training doesn't change because politics are going to subdue what training there needs to. It's actually going to regress the training, and the people are going to get more angry, which means when they get in front of a cop, somehow in their brain, they're going to think, I'm going to get beaten by these cops. And so they flee. So, or at least that's the excuse that they use. So, and there are criminals out there who believe if they chase, it's going to amp it up enough to where when the police put their hands on them, they're going to yell, I can't breathe. And then they're going to get a lawsuit where they can sue police department, right? Yeah. So that's what's happening. This entire thing is already being presented exactly like it would be presented in a court of law. It's just that they're putting it in front of the camera so they can convict these 4 or 5 guys and make a name for themselves. That's all that comes out of this. That lawyer makes a name for himself. These civil rights people make a name for themselves. People get check marks on their career, and nothing comes out of this. The community isn't any better. Law enforcement isn't any better, and we don't learn anything from it. It gets worse, and people are going to lose their businesses. They're going to their cities are going to be more dangerous because police won't want to do their job. And that's what comes out of these courts of public opinion. Nothing.
Well, you've got chiefs of police. I'll use Houston again. We had 4 guys involved in a shooting. It was a righteous shooting investigated by in Houston, police officer involved shootings or death in custody investigated by the homicide division, internal affairs, a shooting team or a civil rights team from the district attorney's office. the medical examiner. I mean, you've got all sorts of people that examine these things when they happen. And these officers were all cleared. It was a good shooting, and it was on video. It was a good shooting. They were not indicted. They were no billed. And the chief of police, what do you think he did? He fired them. Now they've got their jobs back, and that chief of police is no longer here. But I'm just saying that this stuff, this negative stuff about the police, is propagated by these liberal police chiefs that think they are somehow appeasing a community of people by taking
careerists
and doing the wrong thing. And I'll tell you what, appeasement has never worked in war. It doesn't work in raising children. That dadgum sure doesn't work in police work.
Yeah.
So you've got to take a stand for what is right. And
careerists, he froze. Careerists are just as bad. Careerists are just as bad as
but everybody loves sausage, but nobody likes to see it being made. So I'm just saying.
You were frozen, and then you came back with that quote. So that was a good one.
Who did that?
You were frozen, but you came back with that quote.
Oh, okay. So and that's my point here is that everybody wants the police. I mean, look, when people get in trouble, I don't care what community they're in.
Yeah.
Whatever flavor they are, when they get in trouble, who do they call? They don't call the crackhead down the street. They call the freaking police. And they expect them to be there. And I tell you what, when I worked patrol, I worked in black communities. And there was a distinction and a difference between one community that I worked in, which were property owners. These were people that this was a part of Houston that black population, and it was a community of hardworking property owners, people that worked hard all their lives and have accomplished things. Then I worked in an area of Houston that was just north of this place that were Section 8 apartment complexes. A whole different mindset, same type, same community, same demographic, but a completely different mindset. And I can tell you those folks that I worked for in that community of hardworking folks, they appreciated us. They were the ones that called us to say, so-and-so down the street is up here tearing up my stuff and I want something done about it. We didn't care what flavor anybody was. We just knew that there was some person who had done a wrong thing to a good person. And they wanted us there to take care of that. And that's what we did. Now, when I got up to that other location, those people didn't give a crap. And we had more problems there in compliance. We had more crime. I mean, I'm just saying, same demographic, but they come from different points on the radar. And when you have people that are, and it doesn't make any difference what the demographic is, it's the same situation with white folks. It's the same situation with Asians. It doesn't matter. You pick your flavor. I'm telling you, bad people in whatever demographic you want to pull out, they're bad people. And
I worked Asian criminal enterprises when I was in the bureau for 4 years. I can tell you, I've gotten in more fights with Asian gang members or drug dealers than I did African American or black guys or anybody else. The majority of people that we arrested, besides Asians, were white people in the FBI. But the reality is, if somebody
everybody
wakes
kung
up,
fu fighting,
they were all kung fu fighting. I never ran into any of that.
That'll probably get a bunch of responses.
Yeah.
That's the other thing we've lost. We society has lost their sense of humor.
Yeah.
Let me get to the comment here. Phil probably will get eviscerated for that, but Phil is a man, can handle himself. Catherine C. Tyre's mom has spoken about how this is black on black crime, but it's racial because the police believe they would be able to get away with those because he is black. Followed real quick. Hold on. because Kevin Callahan basically sums it up for America as an Irish man. You're damned if you do and damned if you don't. It looks like being a police officer in America. It's a tough job out there. Every human is different. Everyone has an agenda. God bless them all. Irish view. So maybe that's a good place to stop. But Phil, let me say this. Phil and Jonathan are both filled with integrity. And I know there's going to be people out there watching this who are going to say, why would you have two white guys on to talk about this? This came up very impromptu because it's going on in the news, and that's why I decided to talk about it. I would certainly have brought in an African-American or someone with that viewpoint, but these guys have dedicated their lives to law enforcement, and I wanted to give them a chance. And Phil always says, and I don't know if you want to reiterate that, Phil, because I ask you, when you interview someone, the first thing you do is you say to yourself, doesn't matter race, color, creed, orientation, right? You just are trying to investigate the crime. Is that correct?
Completely objective. It doesn't, the only time that plays a role is to develop the approach that I'm going to take, because I hate to enlighten everybody here, big news flash, but everybody's different. And whatever particular community demographic that I'm going to be in and interviewing, I have to consider those things, because I don't want to walk in and I do not want to be inappropriate. I don't want to be insulting. I don't want to be patronizing. I don't want to be condescending. I just want to walk in there and get to the truth and establish a relationship with that person that they will trust me enough that we can get into that conversation. So it matters not to me in terms of the person. It's only part of the picture about how I make that approach and how am I going to be able to better communicate with them in that setting.
This is a feeling a lot of people have by dippity do. We've literally watched black men comply and still get murdered by cops. People who refuse to look at the way racism is systemically woven into the fabric of our society are the reason this happens. We're definitely not going to solve this issue. I can tell you that today.
Can I say something about that real quick? And
yes, sir.
I mean, this is the reality of what the public believes is systemic racism is really systemic breakdown in skin in the game. People do not have skin in the game. We've gone past systemic racism, whatever anybody wants to believe. Does racism exist? Sure. Hate is always going to exist no matter where you are. I got a buddy who goes to Africa every year on safari. Every year he goes there, and he's like in tight with a family over there. And they told him one day, they said, we want to take you somewhere and show you something so you can go back to America and show everybody else. They took him 30 miles on the other side of this hill and showed him where you can buy a human being for $200, right? This is the reality of the real world. So the real world, what people think is systemic racism, are neighborhoods that exist around the country where violence is systemic. Violence is systemic. People not caring about each other is systemic. Law enforcement that is put in a job where they will not succeed. You cannot put a cop in the position that they're in and expect them to succeed every single day. There is going to be tension, there's going to be violence, and people are not going to comply because we don't have skin in the game. We forgot that we're a nation of people and a nation of laws. So let me say this one thing. I've gotten to a point myself where I hear what people are saying and I can see it from their point of view, but I'm only going to tell you the truth. I'm not going to come up here and try to spin this and say, because I'm white, I can't tell you the reality of what's going on. Yeah. That a black cop would be able to tell you better. That's nonsense. That's nonsense. I have sat from the pinnacle of the mountain in all edges of law enforcement and military and watched what's going on with this nation and this world. And the reality is everybody thinks they're oppressed. Everybody thinks they have less of a deal. And then they don't have skin in the game to go out and try to fix their communities. Let me say this. Go out and try to fix your community. Go out and see if those gang members are interested in what you have to say. Go out and see if young people who won't even talk loud enough for you to hear because they're checked out. Go and take whoever wrote that. Go and see if those people will listen to you. I can guarantee you they won't. So when officers who are trying to police and keep things in order, if they won't listen to you, they're certainly not going to listen to them. And if we don't have respect for the laws, that's where this stuff starts to happen. And it really
So I'm
comes
going to
down
give
to that.
Well,
Phil,
can
I'm going to give
can I
you the
say
last
something
word.
real quick?
Yeah, let me give you the last word real quick. Left-handed RN nurse writes, why are so many mass shooting white men are captured alive, but lone black men on a traffic stop ends up dead? No excuse for 5 cops versus 1 man beaten to death. And this final comment, and I promise we're moving on. STS and Joel made a poor decision with these folks and topic. I'll stand by these guys 7 days a week, 8 days a week, 365 days a year, 24/7. These guys both have a lot of integrity. But then again, true colors are being shown. So now I know where to take my views. This is gross. Sorry, not sorry. Well, that's what's great
Same
about
guy.
America.
Well,
That's what's great about America. You can go, RC doesn't like, this, but it's a very difficult conversation. I can tell
That's
you.
not a conversation, though.
I've talked to
Well,
Phil
just
Gil.
real
With more
quick here.
integrity. But Phil, I'll give you the last word here.
Well, so just real quick here. Look, the 1-2 times before there about there's still black men complying. I want him to show me one example. First of all, I don't know of any example where somebody was complying and they were murdered by a cop. So I don't know what he's talking about. I want to see that example. The second thing is about the systemic racism thing. People say that word and they don't even know what it means. What does systemic means? It means the system is corrupt, right? Well, the systemic racism has been legislated away. It's just what Jonathan just said. There is no longer systemic racism in this country. Every time there's been something that has been shown to be that, it has been corrected. We are the only country on the face of the planet that has ever done that. Has tried to perfect a system. It's not a perfect system, but it's the best one going. Regarding this person here that thinks that we're gross and all that good stuff, that's not a reflection of us. That's a reflection of you. So if you're that close-minded and you're not willing to hear the other side of the reality that we live in, then I'm sorry. And I'm sorry you lost a viewer, Jonathan or Joel.
Hey, I will always lose a viewer to have my man Phil and Gil speak their truths, and not everyone.
I challenge RC. I challenge RC to go on a police ride if he can do that and see the reality that's out there. People don't know the reality. You think that Phil and I got into these jobs and these careers because we want to beat up people because we're racist. I got in this job because I'm an American and I have skin in the game. I get up every day. Every day when I get up, I have to limp to the bathroom and come in and get some coffee until I get warmed up. I go out and I sit for too long. My injuries start hurting. At night, it's not uncommon for me to have to take something to sleep, not because I necessarily can't fall asleep, but because I'm in so much pain. All that comes from my service to this nation. Has nothing to do with racism. I serve the Constitution and I serve every single person, black, white, Latino, Asian, it doesn't matter. Even people who come over here illegally into this country, they still are here and the Constitution is going to protect them. And I serve the Constitution. And I just cannot emphasize this enough. Are there racists out there that are cops? There
Sure.
may be. Were they raised that way? Maybe. But a lot of people who develop this mindset in these communities where they just don't, they have no patience with people in their communities. It's because their communities are bad. The communities themselves are full of crime and hate and disrespect for government, for laws, and for the police. And that is the reason why these things happen. It is not happening because police are racist. It's not happening because there's a systemic system that's racist. It's happening because the neighborhoods and the communities around this country have no skin in the game. They don't respect anyone, and they do whatever they want. And when something happens, they don't comply with the law, good or bad. And it ends up in these situations.
To Jonathan's point, and we'll wrap this part of the discussion, about going and doing a ride along. That was part of my job in the media. As a matter of fact, the Emmy Award I won was for a ride along with the Pinal County Sheriff's Department in Southern Arizona through the desert overnight. and we ended up in a chase and got 10 drug runners. And you see firsthand what they're doing in the chill of the night. The desert is freezing. You know, they're using why am I blanking on the word, Jonathan? The special eyeglasses, the
night vision
goggles. They're using the night vision goggles. Very scary situation. Weapons involved on both sides.
And that's in the middle of nowhere.
In the middle of absolutely nowhere. In the middle of cotton fields. And when you see stuff like that firsthand, you can't help but have a healthy respect for law enforcement. Is it a perfect profession? Absolutely not. Are there problems? Yes. Michelle Cavernos, my friend now from South Africa, watching in Cape Town. So much hate today. No one knows what happened when these events took place. No one can assume and say what actually went down. Obviously, it is sad, very sad, but law enforcement are there to uphold the law. I never thought I would say this, but let's move on to a lighter topic, Idaho. So, Phil, to you, and we'll go a little bit longer here and try to get a little bit of Idaho and a tiny bit of Murdaugh in here in light of what we just discussed. And thanks to everybody, and thanks for trying to stay open-minded on this. It is a very difficult difficult subject to discuss all around.
I challenge RC to stay on and not tune out of this podcast. I think he should stay on. Anybody who's angry, I just challenge him to continue to watch this and realize that you're not listening to people who hate or believe in killing innocent people. We are people who follow a professional manner. Just like an accountant is not trying to cheat you on your taxes. I can't say anything about lawyers, but we are there as police officers to make sure that your life and where you live is a place of laws and safety. And so I just want this guy RC. I want him to go on a police ride along, and I want him to realize that that's not conversation. You can't just lose respect for somebody because you disagree or you don't see the whole gist of it. And so anyway, I just want to say, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So law enforcement's got a better record than the clergy.
This is true.
I'm not even going.
That's true. That's true. So.
I'm a Jewish guy on this panel. I'm not going there. So on to Idaho for a minute. So the big news this week in the Idaho 4, obviously the tragic murder, is the mother of.
Hey, Joe.
Yeah.
Before we get into this, I got to say one other thing.
Sure.
What you just said is the perfect example of what we've been talking about this whole time. When Jewish people were put on a train, and first before that, they were put into slums.
By the way, it is Holocaust Remembrance Day today. So
there you go.
Good time to talk about it.
Where the word ghetto comes from is where the Jews were put in Germany. They were oppressed. They were put there. They had their stuff taken away from them. And then they were put on trains and taken to a camp. That is systemic racism. That is true racism and oppression. What we see here in the United States is something that we are given a gift. And if the society that lives in this nation and the police that live in this nation were all to realize this, and we all came together, we'd realize that there is very small oppression, very small hatred. And if we work to police our communities and work together, we will be safer, but we have to have a perspective. And that perspective is exactly what you were just talking about. What happened in Germany, that is systemic. What happens over in Africa, where these people are being sold for $200 as humans, like a commodity, now
today,
that is a systemic racial, that is a breakdown of the system. What you have here is a gift, and we're not taking advantage of this gift. We're using the gift because we feel like it owes us. And if we realize this as Americans, not black or white, not rich or poor, if we realize this as Americans, not only will we never be in the position or put people in the position that the Jews were in, but we will have a country that, we don't have to have socialism. We take care of people. We don't have to have abortion because we raise people not to, to go down that road and to be safe and to think before they act on their emotions and things. We would have people on the other side who understand this, and this side understands that side. We would have all these things would be taken care of if we acted as a society and realized the gift that we've been given. That's the problem. We don't have a litmus test, and that litmus test is Hitler and the Jews and that oppression. And what they went through, that is not where we want to go. And the only way we can stop that is if we all come together and accept this gift, as hard as it may be, and plow this field together. That's the way this is going to work.
Well said. Whew. All right. So the Idaho 4. The news this week, Xana Kernodle's mother, whose name is Karen Northington, came out and spoke to Ashley Banfield of News Nation, and she took her own heat for that because if you watch the interview, the mother, who is an admitted drug user, did not look well at all, and a fair amount of people felt like she was being exploited. But Kara Northington came out and said, and I'm quoting here, "I am heartbroken because I trusted her." And she's talking about Ann Taylor, the public defender. She pretended that she was wanting to help me, and to find out that she's representing him, Brian Kohberger, I can't even convey how betrayed I feel. So the issue here was Ann Taylor's the public defender in Kootenai County, and she was assigned and was working a case with Karen Northington, Xana's mother. And then when Brian Kohberger was charged with murder, she picked up the Kohberger case, and then there was an obvious, what they said was a conflict of interest. And so on the day of Kohberger's very first court appearance, January 5th, Ann Taylor noted that there was a conflict and dropped Xana Kernodle's mother's case. Phil, to you first, when you heard this, your initial reaction?
Well, I understand how she must feel on an emotional level, but the reality is that the evildoer gets as much of a chance as a good defense as she does. So if that's the task that's been handed to that public defender, then she will have to do it with due diligence, just like she is representing the mother. So I get it on an emotional level, but the reality of the way things work under the Constitution, the evildoer gets that right just like she did. So I feel terrible for her that she feels that way, but I understand it.
What was interesting is we had on the former Idaho Attorney General and the former Lieutenant Governor of Idaho, a gentleman named Dave Leroy, and that was the last episode. You can go back and watch it if you want to check it out. He said, in his opinion, it's an emotional conflict of interest, but from a legal standpoint, he doesn't see a conflict of interest as long as proper waivers are signed. But Jonathan, is this just kind of creating a mess in an already very dark case, just complicating matters here?
Again, we're looking at the court of public opinion as well as the legal system here. And I would like to know if there was a discussion by the judge when this was appointed, if it was made known immediately, because unless Xana's mom has changed her name, this attorney had to have known that this may be an issue. And if that wasn't discussed by the court system before this even kicked off, when they initially assigned her this case, I find that problematic, that they didn't figure that there was that she handled one of the victim's moms in a case, that was going to potentially be a conflict of interest. Now, I don't know exactly what the conflict would have been. A good attorney can separate these things, but the reality is for Brian Kohberger, that's where the conflict really existed, in that he did not have a reasonable expectation that this woman who had handled a client before and her daughter's murdered is now his attorney. If it was me and I was in that circumstance, I'd be innocent, of course. But if it was me in Brian Kohlberger's position, I would lose it. I would not. That would be a huge thing for me. The fact that you have a woman who could be prejudiced because she knows the mother of this woman who was killed. I'd be very concerned. So I think removing that attorney was the right thing. But the reality is that attorney should never have been appointed if there was even an inkling of a relationship there. So I don't know if somebody changed their name and it just slipped through the cracks. But again, this is a system and systems fail. But I really do put this on the back of the attorney if the attorney did not make this known.
L. Collins writes, Taylor was needed for the Kohlberger case due to her experience, which is true. There's only 14, I believe, death penalty certified public defenders in the entire state of Idaho.
Well, Joel, my comment quickly was going to be, I don't know what the number are of district attorney or public defenders that they have that are qualified to try that kind of a case. So I don't think there's
in the whole state.
I don't think there's anything nefarious going on here. And I don't, I'm sure that discussion was had. I don't think it's a failure of the system. I think, they've got what they've got, and who knows how that all came about. We weren't there for those discussions, so I'm kind of holding judgment on how that all came about. But
I think Coop 3000 says it really good right
here.
Yeah,
Coop 3000 is becoming a friend of the show here. He shows up often. We appreciate it, Coop. The conflict is that Kohlberger could later claim that he didn't get zealous representation because Ann Taylor was sympathetic to Kernodle. I doubt she'd had actual bias. And by the way, look who's here, RC. And he's talking about this. Change of topic. I do say I understand fully why Ann Taylor is representing BK. Even though we think he is not guilty, she's the only one who has the credentials to represent him in this state, right? RC, kudos to you for hanging around and being enough of or big enough of a man to stay with us, even though you don't like any of us. Phil?
Assuming RC's a man.
Yeah,
that's actually true.
Yeah.
I don't know. I saw what appears to be a rocket ship, and it's a phallic symbol. So maybe it's something Freudian. Maybe it is a woman. I have no idea. RC, let us know if you're a male or female. But I don't know, Phil. Same question to you. Does this just kind of muddy the waters, and is that something that we as the public should be worried about or not?
About the public defender?
Yeah. I mean, it's a legal issue, but it's also a public opinion perception issue.
I mean, again, the optics may look bad. We don't know why the decision was made. To sit here and speculate that he could do this on appeal. Look, he'll do it as long as that defender, if that's the one that ends up staying with that case, does her due diligence and represents him in the best way possible, because that is his right under the Constitution. And there's no glaring circumstance that would indicate that he did not get a proper defense, then I think we're all speculating, and we're going in the circles of something we don't even know. So the optics may look bad. I'm sure there was probably a reason why that decision was made, and it may be something as simple as what Jonathan was alluding to, that she's got a different last name. There was no connection until the connection was made by the mother. So
that's actually a great point. Jane Walker writes, this attorney also represented both of Maddie's parents. I mean, it's a small area, small neighborhood, if you will. Lorca writes, this is setting up to be a future mistrial if the public defender doesn't recuse herself. And Gil and Phil, in case your feelings are hurt, Florida Gal says, I love these guys. They actually speak from the police's perspective. So happy ending to that. Let's let's now pivot over to because I want to get a little Murdaugh in here as well. Phil, starting with you. So this is a guy who comes from his father, grandfather, great grandfather were all big time prosecutors and attorneys in this Colleton County, small county in South Carolina. He gets into tons of financial trouble, basically stealing money as an attorney, and then apparently, according to the prosecution, hits a boiling point and decides, in the state's opinion, to try to get empathy and throw off people, decides to suddenly murder his wife and son to try to get this empathy, which is the state's case. What is your overall take on this, viscerally, with all your experience? Is Murdaugh just a bad seed here?
I can put it in maybe one or two sentences. And this is something that I have all my time in law enforcement, my time in homicide. This is a reality that I came to realize. And this is a perfect case. Anyone, you, me, Jonathan, your mom, anyone is capable of any act under the right set of circumstances. And I've said that before. Alex Murdaugh is the example of what I just said. This is a guy whose family, I think I read, that has been in that area since like 1865.
Yeah.
He's got 3 generations that were they call them solicitors, but they were district attorneys from 1920 to 1980 something, I think, or 90 something. And he was only involved with the solicitor's office, as I've read, as a contractor. So he was never a bona fide prosecutor, which is what I'd heard before, but that was later explained. And in fact, the original Buster Murdaugh, who was a solicitor, the DA, he was indicted on federal charges about giving some information to some whiskey runner, some bootlegger in the area there, and was acquitted. And I think I read 2 weeks later he was reelected. So they've got quite a history there. They've got this law firm. Everybody knows who they are, and they are the movers and shakers. In effect, they're the boss hog of that particular county. So, having said all that, just looking at Alex Murdaugh, I think he's a creepy dude just to look at. But that's just a personal opinion. But something happened here. He obviously, I think one thing kind of perpetuated the next thing, right? So he's been doing this stealing from clients, embezzling from the family law firm. He's been a thief for a while, it would look like.
He's facing 99 criminal charges. One of the things that came up in our conversation yesterday, we're doing this case every day now for those who are interested. And Gil, maybe I'll get your take on this. So we had the lawyer on, Eric Bland. Eric Bland. He was on last night, and said that, and he's representing. So there are so many twists and turns to this case, but Alec Murdaugh's family had a housekeeper named Gloria Satterfield that allegedly died under mysterious circumstances. And this guy, Eric Bland, is representing her family. Anyway, what he said was, why didn't they try him on all these financial crimes first and then try him for this double homicide? Basically pointing to what happened to O.J. Simpson. They tried him for murder. He was acquitted. And Eric Bland thinks he's going to get acquitted in this case. And then they had to go back and charge him with something else. So he served his time. Any thoughts on that, Phil, that maybe they should have charged him criminally, tried him first for the financial crimes, and then tried him on murder charges?
You talking to me or Phil?
Yeah, no, to you, Gil.
Jonathan. I don't know. I mean, if those are going to be two separate cases, it's not really going to matter one way or the other, because if he got convicted on the financial crimes, the judge probably wouldn't let that information in for the murder case anyway. So I don't know if that would really matter. If those were all part of the same case, how they present it that could make a difference. You present the financial crimes and show the evidence of that as a totality of circumstances of his character, so that you can show that he's capable of doing these bad things. I don't think that this guy's going to get acquitted. For one, OJ, again, the stuff that we were talking about earlier, there was a huge societal uproar about OJ. Where I don't think anybody cares about this Murdaugh guy, because his history, the person that he is personally, is rancid, and he's very onious, and I don't think there's any question about the character of this guy and the things that he's done on a personal level. So I don't think he has even an ounce of the love that O.J. Simpson had from back when that occurred. So I don't think this guy's going to get acquitted. And again, circumstantial evidence for cases, you can get convictions on that. And I've watched enough of the reports on Murdaugh and the documentary that was on him. I think there's, if this is presented right, the evidence that's out there, it will come down to a jury making a decision on what they believe circumstantial, unless there's some hard-lying evidence that we don't know about right now that hasn't been presented. But I think that from what I've looked at, it really is going to come down to whether the prosecutor can convince these people that he is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. If the prosecution does not do their job, though, there is enough circumstantial evidence where, like Phil said before, it only takes one juror to disagree because they don't like the cops or they don't like the way things were handled. So hopefully they won't go down that road, and we'll get all the circumstantial evidence that we need to convict this guy.
By the way, Caroline Ciano writes, maybe you should pay attention to the fact that censoring RC will lose you more than one. Caroline, I put up like 4 or 5 of his comments. I don't think I'm censoring him. I'm doing the exact opposite. And I'm loving the fact that RC stayed on. Listen to Learn writes, this guy cracked, and I got to let these guys, by the way, go in just a couple minutes, because I'm definitely overstaying my welcome with them, and they both carry weapons. This guy cracked and snapped when all his crimes were revealed. I think that's pretty basic. Phil, so there's been obviously the prosecution started bringing up witnesses. This I thought would be of interest to you, Phil, since you're an investigator. And the second witness was the Colton County Major Jason Chapman, who was dealing with the 911 call when it came in. And he testified he found it strange that Murdaugh kept asking when first responders would arrive. And then the only thing I thought was odd was he wanted to separate the call. It was, I need to call my family. And then he just disconnected the call. You have investigated a lot of things. What does it tell you when someone faces the murders of their wife and son, and all they're interested in is knowing when first responders are going to arrive, and then wanting to get off as quickly as he can?
Well, I think what it indicates to me is that Murdaugh had a plan. He executed that plan, and now he's trying to sell the story about what happened. And when he's told to stay on the line, or they want to keep him on there, well, he's getting off script, so he's got to get back on it. And the only way he can do that is to separate himself from that phone call. I know I think one of the detectives, one of the officers at the scene, noticed that he was, I think the word he used was hysterical, but he saw no tears. And there was a interview class that I had gone through. Carlston Selly, he was a detective out, I think, at San Diego Sheriff's Office, and he had a little quote that I've used in my classes that's perfect about people who are emoting, but you don't really see anything about how they're emoting. What he used to say is that lips that lie are sticky and dry. The liar's palms are not. Genuine tears can be verified only when accompanied by snot. So I would say that
That's really good. That's true.
You got to write that down for me.
Because at the scene, there were no tears, there was no snot, then all that hysteria was an act. And along with what Jonathan was saying, we don't know if they have some direct evidence, about it. I guess we'll see that later in the trial. In regards to trying all these theft cases first, you would always try your most serious charge first. They need to get this done, because then people would be going, well, why are you messing around with these theft cases when he's got this double homicide thing? And I think there's a lot behind that. I mean, there's some weird deaths in this case. The
There's
lady
so much. Yeah, there's
them.
the housekeeper. The housekeeper fell down a flight of stairs.
Yeah,
allegedly by some dogs, and
that's
died.
a little weird. And then
There
you've
was
got
the
the
19
case
there was
of Buster's friend,
yes,
who was homosexual.
yes,
And
Stephen Smith, 19
I mean,
years
who
old.
knows who knows if Murdaugh wasn't in a relationship with that young man, because I don't think that homicide has been solved yet. So there's a lot of smoke around this fire that Murdaugh has started.
There are rumors swirling, if you can believe that one of the Murdaughs was in a relationship with Stephen Smith, the 19-year-old, not necessarily Alec, but that is in the rumor mill, which I should not be churning, but since you just brought it up. And then there was Mallory Beach, who was killed in a boating accident, where Paul Murdaugh, who ended up being murdered, was allegedly responsible in some way for that. So this is a really wild and twisted.
Oh, it's
case.
crazy. You can't script this stuff.
No.
And I think that system down there has got some issues, right? The system itself down there has some issues, but I see what.
Well, that's a good
Anissa,
old boy network. Yeah. So Albanian and Anissa here writes, Alex will not be convicted, Gil. You might want to research this case a bit more respectfully, but there are a lot of people who say that.
Well, here's the thing, though. When you have
we're getting banged up today, boys.
When you have a
right.
system, when you have a system that's broken, and then that system is put on a pedestal for all to see, they are going to find somebody to hang. And Murdaugh is probably going to be that guy. So I would say that the chances in that situation, if it was like his financial crimes or it was something else, he probably might, in a system like that, get away with it. But if the system itself has issues, and then it becomes this broad on the national and global stage, there's probably a pretty good chance that he will get convicted, because the system wants him to go away. So when you deal with a system that's corrupted, the system will eat its own. So hopefully that's what will occur.
Well, let's remember, it's black and white here. I mean, if he did it and they prove it and he's found guilty, that's the end of this discussion.
Exactly.
So, I mean, the system works. I mean, whether people believe it or not, the system works equally for everyone. And if he's the guy that did it, then he will be convicted of that if the jury beyond a reasonable doubt. So we got to remember the mechanics of how this thing works. And the influence there, I think that, I don't know that the system is trying to purge him, which would mean you've got people within the system that are trying to do it. But I think that I'm a guy that I don't believe in the glass being half full or half empty. It's always overflowing. So I would like to think that those folks are wanting to make sure they get this right to show that the system does work. Doesn't matter who the defendant is. And if Jonathan says, if the prosecution does their job, then he will be convicted. If they don't, then he won't be.
I when I say that there is a problem in this system, I mean his behavior over a long period of time shows that, and this does happen in smaller places where
Sure.
the attorneys and the judges and these people end up developing these relationships, and they get away with a lot of stuff. They scratch their back and they do these things. They know the system so well. But I do believe that in certain circumstances, this is where media attention can be helpful, because it can hold people to task. Right now, in the O.J. Simpson case, it was totally different.
Well,
if that case had been tried behind the scenes with a different judge, you probably would have had a different circumstance. The same thing with the staircase murder down there in Raleigh. That whole thing, I thought the way that case was handled, the terrible fake guy that was up there doing the blood work, and the judge who just seemed checked out the entire time and never seems to go away. I mean, the judge was like the only judge. It's like on TV, they always have that one specific SEAL or somebody who's always in all the battles. This judge seemed to always be there. And I think in those certain circumstances, if there was no camera and it was tried behind, or in other cases, if it's out in media, it may actually get the ball rolling towards justice. Sometimes.
Well, O.J. Simpson's trial should have been held in Brentwood, not in downtown L.A.
Yeah.
So that was
and no cameras. I don't believe cameras helped that at all.
No.
Interesting. So look at this, RC. This chat consistently shows that we can agree and disagree. I won't start the RC war back up, but my feelings are firm. Compassion, humanity, understanding, human rights, followed by this. I love you guys, though we are just having conversations, all ending on a good note.
Hey, I would never want to make an Albanian mad at me. I'm just going to say that right now. They have a whole way of.
Oh man, you better be careful about that, Jonathan. RC is going to call you out for that. Look, here's my deal. Look, I think what people will see with Jonathan and I is, number one, we are very transparent.
Everything he just said, we are.
And number two, we are very passionate about what we believe, about what we know is truth, and about what our experience has taught us. And that's what we're trying to express and convey to anybody that's watching this. If people get offended, well, that's just too bad. If they run around here and they're the victim all the time, that's too bad. And we're not, it is not our intention to offend anybody, but I will tell you this: the truth is designed to make people feel uncomfortable. So there you go.
And that's not just any man, ladies and gentlemen. That is America's most respected detective. Spent 23 years working as a homicide detective in the Houston Police Department with over 400 homicide cases. A Marine, the owner of Kindred Spirits Investigations, and the star of the show, The Interrogator. The big buff man with the goatee. Jonathan Gilliam is a career public servant, a Navy SEAL, former FBI special agent. Jonathan, Phil had his final word. We talked about a lot of it heated. Any final thoughts before I present some programming notes?
Can you put his quote back up there? Can we get that back up there?
By RC?
RC's? Yeah. I want to point something out about that, and then that's it.
If I can find it. Where was it?
Oh, and I was saying that about Albanian Anissa. I have great love for Albanians, and I would never want to make them mad, because they have a whole different way of getting back at you, and I respect Albanians greatly. So here's what I want to say to RC is that, I like the fact that your feelings are firm. My feelings and Phil's feelings are the same way. I'm a compassionate person. I am a believer in humanity and doing things humanely. I understand all the people I ever arrested and had to lay hands on. I knew that there was this. Most of the time, it's not just a single action. It's a road they've gone down, and it's a bumpy road a lot of the times. And I believe in human rights. I love every human I come up against, whether they hate me or not. I do not go after them with a sense of hate. But with all that being said, you have to add something to the end of that. And that's, you have to have an understanding of the community in which these things occur. Because like I said before, you go to Beverly Hills or you go to a place where, like Phil was talking, where people own their homes. It doesn't matter what color you are. You're going to see a difference in crime in those areas, which means the neighborhoods themselves. Cops go to police academies. They go through field training with their field training officer, but then the neighborhood raises them. The neighborhood teaches them the tactics that work and won't work. You can teach them all you want in the police academy, but when they get into their neighborhood, the neighborhood in which they work is what dictates what's effective and how high they have to go on that pendulum of use of force or continuum of use of force. The neighborhood in which they work is what is going to dictate that. So I would add with that, stand firm on your compassion, humanity, understanding human rights, but understand the neighborhoods in which these things are occurring. And if you don't know them, I think you'd be very surprised at what is actually going on in these neighborhoods. It's not about oppression and white and black. It has to do with hopelessness. It has to do with poverty, and it has to do with people who, despite their hopelessness and poverty, they don't take they don't have skin in the game. So they don't get together and fix the systemic problems of violence in their societies, right? That is a problem. The system of government that has its problems, but the system of the citizenry has major problems. And until we see people working together and understanding the neighborhoods that these cops work in and how they differ, then I don't think you're going to get a real grasp on the situation. If you're counting on police cams and TV to tell you what the truth is, you're going to have a skewed opinion every time. You got to go see these areas and see the reality of what's happening, and the politics and how it hurts law enforcement and makes people angry. That's the reality of all this. It's not just about compassion. It's about the neighborhood that people work in.
Can I say one quick thing,
danger.
Phil, you can always say one more thing. I used to work as a teacher before I was in broadcast news, and I worked with my assistant teacher. She was a very funny woman named Jeanette then. I'll never forget her. And I used to ask her for advice all the time. I had no idea what I was doing. I was working in a very low income, dangerous neighborhood. And every time I would say, "Hey, Jeanette, I have a question," she would say, "Ask two." So anytime you say, "Can I say one more thing?" I'll say 2 more things.
Well, so to RC, I am glad that you didn't leave. And I think I can speak for Jonathan and Joel as well. I am really glad you've hung in there, and I hope you keep coming back. But what I'd like you to remember is that we are not trying to convince you of anything. We are only trying to give you a perspective of our life experience, in the hopes that you might have a different understanding or another understanding about the world that we operated in and how we operated within it. So I don't want you to lose any of those attributes that you listed there, because Jonathan and I and Joel, we all agree with them, and we hold those dear as well. And I'm glad to see you are apparently as passionate about that as we are about our presentation. So I'm glad you're here, and I would just ask that you keep coming back, and that we can provide you a different perspective as you can provide us your perspective.
Very well said. Michael Couture rounds it all out by saying, "Jonathan seems like a good dude, newish follower of the channel, and I respect the unscripted realness of these interviews, pods. Jonathan is a good dude. Phil is a very good dude. They're both good dudes. I don't know about myself, but
great. You're a great dude.
Programming notes here. Thank you, sir. I had the unique pleasure of interviewing Dr. Henry Lee. If you don't know who he is, you better Google him. We talked about O.J. Simpson. He worked on the O.J. case. He worked on the JFK assassination. We're going to release that at some point next week. And
he also worked on the staircase murder,
he did.
I believe.
Yeah. Yep.
Dr. Henry Lee. Ask him if OJ did it, because I did.
I asked him. He won't answer, but he does
Oh,
say
he
this
answered
is,
me.
Oh, he
said,
did.
Sure, he did.
He did say there's a second shoe print there that's never been accounted for. That's what he told me. Oh, he only follows the scientific evidence. However, he said so much more, so make sure you check it out. Also, this Sunday night, we started our true crime adventure with this story, the Dan Markel case out of FSU. He was a Harvard-educated law professor teaching at FSU who was shot in the head twice. His former ex-brother-in-law is now in jail in Tallahassee, about to go on trial. And we are doing a live episode this Sunday on the Dan Markel murder case. Make sure you tune in. I'm dragging my feet to the finish line. Love you, America. See you next time. See you Sunday night. Be there or be square.